Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. I'm so sorry for being late. My laptop is going extremely slow. I'm not really sure what happened, so let's hope it doesn't die out on me or do some kind of a silly game. So we are still on the topic of mindfulness in Islam. We did talk about some of the things on how mindfulness in Buddhism or in the different Asian religions or in what is taught in a lot of the different psychology trainings is different from Islam. And we talked about how in Islam, yes, it's all about shifting focus, but it's not for the sake of necessarily shifting focus, but it is actually in a totally different stance. It actually has a totally different center. And we talked about how it shifts the focus. And we're still actually talking about how Islam shifts the focus. So it's not trying to focus on your breathing or focus on nature or focus on putting rocks over each other or trying to focus on a different vision, but it's actually a whole aqidah. So when we speak about mindfulness in Islam, we're actually talking about a whole aqidah, and we're not talking about a matter in where it is just some form of just a therapy. It's actually a whole aqidah put within it. So having that being said, inshallah, that's what we will be continuing from there. So how does Islam actually shift the center? Where does that actually take place? So when we look at, when we did actually mention that last time, that when we're starting to think about or speak about mindfulness in Islam or any topic that's related in Islam, the center is always Tawheed. The center is always La ilaha illallah, in where the center actually is considered to what really preceded the existence of our creation, and that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the center yourself, the center is your Lord Almighty. You are, as a human being, are being tested within this, let's just call it the different corners of it. And of course, that there's actually a purpose of life. The purpose in life that you are tested in is really how do you implement the words of the Lord Almighty in life. So when you look at Tawheed as being the center, you would recognize then that when we're talking about action, we're talking about action as the center of the purpose itself. So you're also looking at the center and where it is focusing on looking at who is your creator. And in other words, when you're speaking about mindfulness in Islam, how do you relate to your creator is always the main point. So even when you want to speak about trying to do some form of therapy or some kind of growth, it's always the center. How do you relate to your Lord Almighty? How do you relate to your purpose of life? What did you do? What are you going to do? And of course, even when dilemmas do happen in life, it's always trying to tell you, well, focus from the point of dilemma to the Lord Almighty, not to nature, not to your breathing, not to other things, but or even hope for the sake of hope by looking at other people's experiences. But it's actually telling you, no, focus on Allah Almighty. So instead of focusing on poverty, you focus on the name Ar-Razzaq. You focus on the name, the name that really provides you rizq, which is the Lord Almighty, and the names and attributes of the Lord Almighty. Instead of focusing on failure, you're looking at the Lord Almighty as the one to actually give victory and success. And instead of focusing on the pain and focusing on the illness, you're focusing on Allahumma Rabban Nas adhib al-ba's washfi anta shafi la shifa illa shifa'uk ishfina shifa la yaghadiru saqama. You're making that dua. Dua is one of those ways to help you connect with the names of Allah Almighty, is to help you recognize and focus with your words as we do the dua for shifa and for illness or healing. We may basically, Allahumma Rabban Nas, O the Lord of all the people, adhib al-ba's, take away all the pain, washfi, and bring about cure. Anta shafi, you are the one that brings cure. La shifaa illa shifa'uk, there's no cure but your cure. لا شفاء إلا شفاءك. اشفنا شفاء لا يغادر سقما. Ya Allah, bring us a healing that will not leave behind, or that will not give any type of an illness. You think of when you take a medication, which might probably, cure one certain thing, but then you would sometimes get a side effect that would go differently. So here, شفاء لا يغادر سقما. In other words, you're actually asking for a complete healing that will not leave behind any type of an illness other than that. From focus on weakness to focus on the power of the Lord Almighty. So again, you could see that mindfulness in Islam is really where you're shifting your focus on the center, which is Allah Almighty. And it's not other things. It's not anything else. It's always Allah Almighty. That is the center of all the whole mindfulness in Islam. So the purpose is really to shift your focus, and two, to shift it to your purpose. So to shift the focus and to shift it towards the purpose that you were actually created for, which is to be tested. So when you also look at shifting the focus, you're also looking at, shifting the focus from materialism to a spirit, to the ruh on the inside. So when you're focusing from an internal feeling to actually making it into a relationship between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So from focusing on dunya to focusing on akhirah. So when the person is struggling in the dunya, they're focusing on the akhirah, in where they're connecting that even when I'm going through a certain struggle, this is just a temporary thing, because the purpose is actually the akhirah. From focusing on your body to focusing on your spirituality, which is why there's that siyam, in where from focusing on body to giving you that training to actually focus on the spirituality, despite the fact that the body is probably going through different feelings of hunger, from focusing on intimacy to focusing on halal relationship. So from the entertainment, which is actually feeding a lot of this desire, in where it's actually Islam is shifting you where, no, don't go that direction. That's why it cuts off and forbids, for example, things like porn, or things that are haram relationships, or even any type of a relationship outside of halal relationship. So it tells you, for example, you're looking at, instead of focusing on the body and trying to focus on looking good and appearing good, it tells you, no, put on that hijab, and I want you to focus on the inside. I want you to focus on the spirit. Instead of looking at and objectifying women, I want you to look farther and consider, even when you're talking about marriage, the Prophet ﷺ said that a woman is usually chosen in marriage for her beauty, or for her wealth, or for her progeny, in other words, for her tribe and all that. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Fadfar bidat ad-din, taribat yadak." Choose the highest of all those options, and that is piety and righteousness, or else all the other things will leave you really as if you had not chosen anything. Why? Because they wear with time. So when he said taribat yadak, it's kind of like saying, well, then you're just going to be really left to nothing, with bareness. Why? Because it wears off with time. Whether we're talking about money, whether we're talking about beauty, or whether we're talking about family, it all starts wearing off with time. So the Prophet ﷺ was reminding us that even when we're talking about marriage, you're looking at what matters the most: principle, piety, religiosity. Those are the things that matter the most. And even when we're looking at the relationship, it's basically, sorry about that, but my mouse is really giving me a hard time, from focusing on even the outside world that's feeding on sexuality and intimacy, to actually focusing on what really matters, which is halal or not. From focusing on work and money to focusing on what really matters the most. Is it halal spending? Is it halal income? Do I have priorities in my wealth distribution that I have to consider before I start just wandering and buying money left and right and using the money? So therefore, it focuses again, shifting the focus from focusing on work, but to focusing on halal. And focusing on halal is actually shifting our focus from materialism to the spirit of the purpose of life, the main reason why you were created. Therefore, the center is the purpose of life and Allah Almighty. From focus on appearance to reducing that focus by lowering the gaze, by wearing hijab, by reducing spending in dunya from wants to needs, in order to shift our focus from wanting to gulp everything all up and gulp the different and trying to somehow contain materialism, to working on containing our spirit, to working on containing what really matters the most, which is the purpose that we were created for. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ in Sahih Muslim, he actually focused on that and brought up this brought up, or let me change the wording, but he actually changed our focus and told us, Inna Allah la yanzuru ila suwarikum wa amwalikum wa innama yanzuru ila qulubikum wa a'malikum. The Lord Almighty does not look at your images or your wealth, but in fact he looks at your heart and your actions. In other words, trying to tell us that what really matters the most is not what you are probably putting in the energy the most. Most of the energy is put in wealth, in order to make money, or in our appearance, the appearance of homes, and how people would see our homes and our beautiful cars and see us as looking prestigious and somehow appearing as if we are on the top of all the different lists of wealth in order to gain some advantages. But the Prophet ﷺ said that's not what matters the most. Don't focus on that. Don't let your focus be on that, but focus on what really matters: the heart and your spirituality, the actions that make the actions, the spirit that makes the actions. Islam shifts the focus from a negative feeling, to a positive spiritual feeling. It goes farther than just an action, in where it tells us, well, you also need to focus on the inner motives of the different behaviors. The inner motives of different behaviors are also part of the whole paradigm of when we're talking about shifting focus. It doesn't just tell you to change the focus of your actions or changing the behavior on the outside, but it goes further on the inside and tells you to wipe away all the different negative feelings that you have on the inside that are probably wearing your actions or eating up your inner comfort, let's say it that way, in which the Prophet ﷺ actually said, Al-Muslimu akhul Muslim. A Muslim is a brethren to another Muslim. لا يخونه لا يخونه ولا يكذبه ولا يخذله. A Muslim does not betray a Muslim, does not basically lie at a Muslim, and does not commit any treachery. كل المسلم على المسلم حرام. The relationship between two Muslims is actually a relationship where it is filled entirely with different boundaries. His chastity and reputation is one boundary you should not cross. 2, his wealth and his property is a boundary you should not cross. 3, his life, and the word damuhu, yes, it means blood, but is actually a metaphor to refer to life. His life and health is actually a boundary that you should not transgress and should not cross. At-taqwa huna. Real religious integrity is deep inside your heart. Ha huna. And the Prophet ﷺ in another hadith pointed to his heart. بحسب امرئ من الشر أن يحقر أخاه المسلم. It is enough to engage in an evil action when a Muslim would condescend his Muslim brother. And this is really important because when we're talking about negative feelings, it's actually, you could see that it involves even on the inside. Don't look at yourself as if you are somehow better than others. Take the moment to actually review yourself and recognize that your Muslim brother and that you don't necessarily have a more important reputation or a more important wealth or a more important right over others. But just as others' properties and others' reputation and others' wealth is important to them, it should be important to you as well, just as you want them to respect your boundaries. Abstaining from negative external and internal influences is actually part of the mindfulness in Islam. So from negative behavior to a positive behavior, from natural reaction to a spiritual action, from a human to divine mannerism. So what does that mean? From a reaction to a new action of principle is really what Islam teaches. The Prophet ﷺ said, ليس المؤمن بالطعان ولا اللعان ولا الفاحش ولا البذيء. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, a believer is not the one that curses, and is not the one that is constantly damning things or complaining about things, and is not the one that uses foul language, or the one that starts, let's call it, uses profanity in terms of speech. Why is that even important? Because although a person can be angry, a person may have that feeling of wanting to retaliate towards other people's behaviors, but the Prophet ﷺ emphasized that a person that embraces Islam, that embraces Tawheed, it is not befit for them to view the world from the type of mannerism of an animal, but in fact, a believer engages in a mannerism that is based on spirituality, in where it's not about retaliation, but is actually embracing righteousness. So from focusing on negative behavior to focusing on positive behavior. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَسْتَوِي الْحَسَنَةُ وَلَا السَّيِّئَةُ ادفع بالتي هي أحسن فإذا الذي بينك وبينه عداوة كأنه ولي حميم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and put in the positive behavior, because the positive and the negative behaviors are not equal. So put in and push forward for the positive one, and you will see that the one that you might have had animosity in between you and him, actually shifting and becoming probably a dear friend because of the good behavior that you put in forward. So therefore, Islam tells us, well, fix the matters, not by retaliation, but fix the matters in terms of social relations by putting in a positive reaction, by putting in and taking out the animosity, taking out the hate, taking out all those negative feelings, to actually putting in a behavior that will shift things on ground. And then instead of probably getting an enemy, you're then getting a friend that you may not have recognized. The Prophet ﷺ says in another hadith, Inna Allah jamilun yuhibbul jamal. The Prophet ﷺ says, the Prophet, Allah Almighty, is beautiful and loves beauty. And he loves seeing the impact of his blessings on his servants. And he hates and detests al-bu'sa wa taba'us. What is al-bu'sa wa taba'us? Al-bu's is basically when a person is constantly complaining of things. It's constantly feeling like everything is just going the wrong direction. They're constantly complaining. When you talk to them, they're always complaining that they just have their life the worst way. No one is going through what they're going through. Everything is just going the wrong way just in their life. And then they're constantly thinking that everything just goes the wrong direction just in their life. But unlike other people, they're just getting it easily. This is al-bu's. This, the Prophet ﷺ says that the Lord Almighty detests, hates al-bu'sa wa taba'us. What is it, taba'us? Al-bu's is what we just talked about, in where the person's constantly complaining of things. But it-taba'us is when the person is constantly living that lifestyle, constantly complaining, constantly. If they're married, they're constantly complaining of their husband. If they have kids, they're constantly complaining about their kids. If they didn't get kids, they're constantly complaining why they didn't get kids. If they went to school, they're constantly complaining about how homework is just an overload and how it's so much. If they got a job, they're constantly complaining about how the job is boring and it's just too much and you can't bear it. They're constantly complaining. These negative people around you, they rub off on you. If somebody is constantly complaining, if you're able to help them, just remember, يبغض البؤس والتباؤس, that the Lord Almighty dislikes that, to help them learn how to look at the world from a positive direction rather than always looking at the negative end. If you're able to help them, do so. But if you're not, find another friend, because they will rub on you. The Prophet ﷺ says in a hadith Qudusi. Now, here's one thing that's always to remember before we tell somebody, stop complaining too much. We will just remind them that the Lord Almighty never puts them in an all negative, in an all hardship, an all challenge, a life full of challenges from every single direction. Why? Because the Lord Almighty says, as in the hadith Qudusi, the Prophet ﷺ says that the Allah Almighty says, يا عبادي إني حرمت الظلم على نفسي وجعلته بينكم محرما فلا تظالموا. O my servants, I have made oppression as forbidden on myself, and I made oppression forbidden on you as well. So do not oppress one another. What is oppression? Oppression, when you consider that oppression is something that you don't like seeing, well, the Lord Almighty is telling you that he will not put you in a situation more than what you can bear. That the Lord Almighty will not put you in challenges just because he wanted to see you suffer. But those challenges could actually be the challenges to take you up higher. So look at those challenges as a positive thing rather than a negative thing. But in order to help you go through that, patience in Islam is the method of hanging in there. When you're looking at sabr, Islam is always telling you that sabr is actually the center of getting into the success from this test of this dunya. The Prophet ﷺ said, ما يصيب المسلم من نصب ولا وصب ولا هم ولا حزن ولا أذى ولا غم حتى الشوكة يشاكها إلا كفر الله بها من خطاياه. The Prophet ﷺ said, with every single hardship, with every single pain, with every single a sorrow, and with every single harm, and with every single ilgham is like feeling, is like a feeling of when you're depressed or feeling so sorrows, so sad because of the different things that are surrounding you. And even when a thorn would prick you, Allah Almighty, if you are patient about it, the Lord Almighty would wipe away from the sins just by being patient over that pain. So how does Islam help in attaining patience? First of all, it tells you that knowing that your weakness does not control the world or your life. Let's say it again. Your own weakness, it's not basically what controls the world around you. So what controls the world and what controls your success? You put in the effort, but the Lord Almighty's barakah, the Lord Almighty's blessings in your effort is what really makes the success. And that way you will be humble. It's not about your intelligence. It's not about the effort and putting in so much effort. It's actually the Lord Almighty seeing you put the effort. So therefore, when your effort fails you, it doesn't mean that your focus should be on your weakness. But you want to remember that when your effort and what you were trying to do just doesn't go the direction that you had hoped it would go, it doesn't mean you stop, because it's not your weakness that controls and determines the successes that you actually achieve. It's basically the Lord Almighty. You continue putting in the effort, knowing that Allah Almighty, that time is actually in the hands of Allah Almighty. Why did we actually talk about time? Because when you live within the world, within life, you're always looking at and concerned about, well, what next? How long am I going to be bearing this? How long is this going to take until it changes, until the situation changes, and all that? And this is especially for those that are constantly complaining. They're always just feeling that I've suffered enough. I went through so much. Why me? How come it's always just on me? Why isn't X or Y suffering the same way? And without you realizing, you're just you're looking at your own time, and you forgot that your time is limited, and that time and qadar and decree is actually in the hands of the Lord Almighty. So having that being said, know that justice is in the hands of Allah Almighty. So the suffering that you are in is not going to be permanent, but is actually going to be in the hands of the Lord Almighty. What if that person was actually killed because of the suffering that they were going through? Even if they were killed, the Lord Almighty says, and whoever was killed in an oppressive manner, the Lord Almighty will compensate them. Yes, in the akhirah, that's one. But even in the dunya, he will actually grant even his guardians an authority. And then, because this authority is going to be so big, Allah Almighty says that وَمَنْ قُتِلَ مَظْلُومًا فَقَدْ جَعَلْنَا لِوَلِيِّهِ سُلْطَانًا فَلَا يُسْرِفْ فِي الْقَتْلِ. So do not abuse the advantage and the authority that you will be granted, because it will definitely be a lot more than you had expected. Now, knowing that justice is in the hands of Allah Almighty is actually to help you focus, rather than focusing on the pain and the injustice that you're going through, focusing on Allah Almighty, knowing that there is an akhirah and that life is a bridge to it. So therefore, all the different things that you might look for in terms of what you had lost in this dunya, with mindfulness in Islam, it's basically asking you, don't let your focus be on here, on this point. To look at this point as your main focal point is really losing out on what really matters. What really matters is really the akhirah. Shift your image, shift your focus to let it go there in order to gain that power to be able to continue your path, to be able to go beyond the suffering, to be able to go beyond the weakness, to be able to go beyond the different challenges. Focus on the akhirah. And remember, this is just a life of transition. Now, different things may actually be the challenging point within ourselves, and that is the nafs. What acts as the biggest challenge that's probably becoming this big rock that is blocking us from being able to move forward? And that is the nafs. Understanding the nafs and understanding what makes us worry and what makes us hate and what makes us get angry, which is really nafs. Nafs is really a disease that takes away your focus, because when you look at nafs, it starts acting as this let's call it a magnet that starts pulling you into the dunya. And when you look at nafs, there's always that constant focus in the Quran on telling you about what your nafs is, so you can understand how to relate to it rather than your nafs controlling you without you realizing. Well, it's kind of like this. When you go to a doctor, the doctor is going to explain by first listening to your symptoms, and then will tell you what is making that illness. They'll draw blood and do different things in order to figure out what really is going wrong within your body. And after diagnosing, then the doctor will explain to you what went wrong in order to tell you what is their plan to correct what went wrong. And that's the same thing. Even though it's your body, but he's actually explaining something about you, about your body, although you're the one that's feeling the pain, but the doctor is going to explain to you what you may not know about yourself. And وَلِلَّهِ الْمَثَلُ الْأَعْلَى, the Lord Almighty is the highest example. The Lord Almighty is explaining to us what you need to know about yourself, and that is the nafs, to learn more about it. And where the Lord Almighty is always constantly telling us that there's this peace within us. Think of it as think of it as a virus, or think of it even a different gland within your body, that it can function right. In fact, without your nafs, you won't be able to get to Jannah. But wait a minute, your nafs is really that main tool as well that can act as the defunctioning, can be the one to dysfunction you, the one to actually make you go slower if it is actually impaired. So when you look at the nafs, think of it as a gland that if it is well paired, it will advance you in what you need to do and in terms of different tasks. But if impaired, it will impair the rest of your abilities. So when you look at Islam, in order to help your nafs not get impaired, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would explain to us what really impairs the nafs. What impairs the nafs is really a number of different things, because it's related to the body, related to the senses. So the nafs becomes impaired by feeding different things that the body desires. So that's why Islam tells us, well, in order to make sure that the nafs does not impair you, you need to guard your senses from haram. So think of it as, well, the doctor is going to tell you what not to eat, because looking at your situation, your health situation, the doctor will tell you, well, eating too much of this is going to get you, impairment in, let's say, the pancreas or whatever it is. And that's the same thing. So Islam will tell you, wait a minute, feeding haram things. What are haram things? Haram things are going to be the matters that will increase the gravity of your desire. What is desire? Desire is going to be what makes you act and behave like an animal. So it's basically the things that are food, water, or let's say drinking, and of course sexuality. Those are the things that your desire are really similar to animals. So what else? Well, these things, your body will convince you that in order to live longer, in order to contain life, you need to feed these elements. So you start feeding these elements by probably feeding more on maybe houses, more on cars, more of advantages, more trying to get different advantages in your brain. You would recognize that by having a prestigious level, probably wealth, that you will get more advantages. In other words, by getting more advantages, you're actually getting a higher chance of living longer, higher chance of getting more property. Property gives you a sense of belonging that it's going to make you live longer. So we're really just like animals in many ways. But Islam tells you, wait a minute, recognize that about yourself, that you have a lot of similarities with animals, that you try to compete because of your concern about life, that you try to compete in different ways in order to embrace materialistic things around you. And it would feed your brain and bring it into an illusion that by embracing all the different materialistic things, that you're somehow going to live longer, that you're somehow going to be capable, that you're somehow going to get all these advantages in life. So Islam tells you, wait a minute, recognize that about yourself and guard your senses, because your senses are going to be fed more. In other words, just like if you eat more sugar, if you're constantly eating more, your stomach is going to get bigger, and then you're going to want more and increased portions. And that's the same thing, that if you don't limit your sexuality to halal, for example, to your spouse, or you're in marriage, you're going to need more. And even the halal areas is not going to be enough for you. You're going to want to, in order to fulfill it, you're going to need more and more. So guarding your senses is basically in order to tell you, that's to keep your nafs from controlling you, to you controlling your nafs. And the Prophet ﷺ, it would actually lay out in different hadith how you guard yourself, how you guard yourself from seeing haram, how you guard yourself from hearing haram, from eating and drinking haram, because that eventually affects your nafs in your ability to control your nafs from engaging in haram sexual acts, to limiting it to making halal family, or to making, of course, family in a halal way. Spirituality cannot grow in a lifestyle away from the purpose of life. Let's say it again. When you speak about spirituality in different religions, spirituality is confined within probably the worship place, the temple, the worship place. But in Islam, it tells you that you cannot grow in spirituality and at the same time engage in a lifestyle that is contradictory to the purpose of life that Allah Almighty created you for. So what does that mean? It means that when you speak about nafs and when you speak about what you engage in, the main focus should be the purpose of life. So to speak about spirituality as if it was something confined in a certain moment and that my lifestyle is not related to it is actually living in discrepancies within your life. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ actually says, "Ma nahaytukum anhu fajtanibuh." What I ordered you to leave and abstain from, entirely abstain from it and totally and entirely leave it. وَمَا أَمَرْتُكُمْ بِهِ فَأْتُوا مِنْهُ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. And what I ordered you to do as much as you're capable of doing. فإنما أهلك الذين من قبلكم كثرة مسائلهم واختلافهم على أنبيائهم. The reason why the different nations of the past have actually went through the different punishments was really because they had done things different than what their prophets had ordered them to do. In other words, they contradicted the orders of their prophets. So what does that really mean, and how does it relate to the point that we're trying to make? The point that we're trying to make is that when you speak about spirituality, were these nations necessarily spiritual? Well, they definitely had a form of spirituality that they were practicing with probably idol worship, or probably they had some forms of gods or some form of different things that they were relating to those spiritual things that they considered. But the Prophet ﷺ was telling us that أهلك الذين من قبلكم. The word أهلك is, yes, I translated it as punished, but it doesn't necessarily only mean punished, but it could also mean that they had perished, or that they had basically lost their connection with life, and their connection with life was really lost when they had done things other than the purpose that Allah Almighty created them for. So eventually their life perished because it went just for that energy that they wanted to put in putting in for building and putting in this materialistic building. In other words, their spirituality contradicted the reality of what the Lord Almighty created in life, which is the purpose, and what is the akhirah, and what is relating to how your own creation is on the inside. Your intention and attention cannot be contradictory. Let's do it again. Your intention and attention cannot be contradictory. If out of all the different things that I have said, you just take this sentence and go from there, that is going to explain a lot of what we're trying to say. Your intention is what Islam is trying to tell you to focus on. That is what creates mindfulness, the intention, your heart on the inside, and your attention is really, let's say, shifted and focused by the different behaviors that you engage in. And that's why when we look at intention and attention, they cannot be contradictory, because you can claim that my intention was to do such and such and to be spiritual and etc. But when your attention is constantly focused on probably gaming or entertainment, or probably in talk and trivial talk and dunya and appearance and all that, there's no way that your intention can build stronger. You're contradicting yourself. Your life, your behavior is really what is going to bring your attention, and your attention is going to determine a lot of your intention and your spirituality. Your lifestyle shapes your heart. Your behavior shapes your heart. If you live for materialism, your life is shaped in materialism. If you live in connection with Allah, your connection deepens. And therefore, when we look at in practice, and when we recognize just this point, that's when we recognize that you cannot live in discrepancies. Your behavior, living a life of just putting in energy to make money, and when a person would want to claim that they're basically religious and they're so connected with Allah Almighty, there's no way. If your life is living in haram, then your attention is elsewhere. Your attention is dunya. Then your nafs is going to be that controlling element that's shifted towards dunya. There's no way that you can have an intention and attention in two different matters. And that's why ما جعل الله لرجل من قلبين في جوفه. There's no way that any man, as in the ayah, could have two hearts. Your heart, that is your intention, is going to be really connected and shifted and swayed based on what you put all your attention to. You need to focus on that during, at least, let's take it during Ramadan. And that's why we put in during Ramadan, put in that attention. Let's shift and let's focus our attention to Quran and dhikr, and try to focus our attention on akhirah so we can learn how to let our intention be corrected. In other words, for those that are struggling with trying to focus on salah or trying to focus on talab al-ilm, we would say, just like Shafi'i, or actually it was Wakiya, all right? He said, شكوت إلى وكيع سوء حفظي فأرشدني إلى ترك المعاصي وأخبرني بأن العلم نور ونور الله لا يهدى لعاصي. He said, I complained to my teacher, my sheikh, Wakiya, that I wasn't able to memorize anymore. My memory is not the same. And he said, and he advised me to leave and abstain from sin. Why? He said, because ilm is a gift from the Lord Almighty and a light from the Lord Almighty. And there's no way that that can be gifted and given to someone that his attention is on sin. Sin is all about trying to engage in feeding desires and talab al-ilm and seeking knowledge, or trying to increase in your level in akhirah, are two different things. They're actually a different focus. So in order to gain the focus on acquiring ilm and being able to connect with the Lord Almighty, you need to fix your attention. You need to fix your attention and what your behavior is constantly focused on. And Islam considers that every practice has an impact on your spirituality. So when you look at it, this is not to tell you to feel guilty about yourself constantly, because it's really important to recognize that mindfulness, of course, in psychology, is always trying to take you away from that shame feeling and trying to, don't feel guilty about it. If it makes you feel good, if you're okay with it, if it feels okay to you, it's okay. Don't feel guilty about it. And that's exactly what the LGBTQ lobby wanted to do, to not make you feel guilty about it, and in fact wanted to go farther and regard that as the center of how you define who has the right to get a job or who has the right to even get any advantage. So the second that you try to say that this is wrong, then you were going to be somehow labeled in different ways. And it's not necessarily just a person practicing on their own, but this is actually trying to expand it and shove it down your throats. No, you have to accept it as an acceptable behavior. And in fact, these are the people that should be considered and top and given the priority and so forth. So in Islam, it's telling you, no, sometimes feeling guilty is one way to help you recognize that you need to go back. So when you're actually recognizing the borders, it's in order to help you stay within the borders. So feeling guilty when you're actually doing the wrong thing, well, just make sure it doesn't take you away from putting in the energy, to make the change. Make sure you don't let that feeling take you away and absorb you entirely, but always have your focus that the Lord Almighty is all forgiving. At the same time, don't forget the focus that the Lord Almighty can also can also look at your sins, and those sins can be the sins to drag you entirely into this dunya, into an animal lifestyle. Islam considers a detailed definition of truth. Truth and all the different relationship of how you behave, that is actually part of truth. Buddhism and atheist religions regard that relativity is the base of truth, because it regarded that there's no paradigm or center to how you define ethics. But in Islam, no, it's all about setting the boundaries to help you define ethics, morality, principle, where you should be going and where you should not be going, what your rights are, what your responsibilities are, in order to make sure that you are connecting both your purpose in putting in the different responsibilities and even your rights to help you fulfill the different responsibilities that you need to, that you have the responsibility to do. So other rights and responsibilities, your rights are really the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was aware that it would be a challenge if you did not have them to be able to do the responsibility. And that's why having a family, for example, is extremely important. So what do I do when my family basically turns their back on my rights? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna Allah ya'muru bil adli wal ihsan. The Lord Almighty orders for justice and ihsan. Ihsan is righteousness, that not necessarily that those that might be responsible to give you those rights, they might not always be there and really apply the responsibilities that they have. So in those situations, the Lord Almighty orders for others, you give the khair, and know that even when others turn their backs on your rights, that the Lord Almighty will give you a compensation, will give you a power. Try moving on despite the hardship, and the Lord Almighty promises you that for those that turn their back on your rights, that the Lord Almighty will compensate you and will give you more and more power later, or probably other power that you may not recognize. So keep putting in that effort. Is all guilt wrong? Now, here are a number of different things. Not all guilt is necessarily wrong, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us about the different types of nafs in order to help us recognize what guilt is wrong and how to work with our nafs, because our nafs can actually be a tool to help us even advance. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that part of the nafs, in nafs al-ammara bis-su, the nafs that is ordering you to do evil. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that in وَمَا أُبَرِّئُ نَفْسِي إِنَّ النَّفْسَ لَأَمَّارَةٌ بِالسُّوءِ إِلَّا مَا رَحِمَ رَبِّي. Now here, in nafs ammara bis-su, nafs is constantly ordering you to do the wrong thing, except those that the Lord Almighty sheds His mercy on. In nafs al-lawwama, the nafs that is constantly blaming one another, or blaming itself, where it's whenever it goes into the wrong thing, it starts blaming and constantly blaming itself, or feeling guilty, or sometimes accusing others of being guilty. That's in nafs al-lawwama. And there's a nafs al-mutma'inna. In nafs al-mutma'inna is really the nafs that is content, that is feeling the stability. Now, when you look at in nafs al-mutma'inna, scholars actually had differences of opinions. Let me just first in nafs al-mulhama speak about this one, and then I'll explain one important point here. In nafs al-mulhama is basically the nafs within the nafs, there is a sense of feeling, kind of like a gut feeling, what we would say a gut feeling, in where you're feeling that there's something wrong in it, that there's something not right within that. You don't really know why, but there's that, what we would say, the gut feeling. That's actually nafs al-mulhama. All right. Now, scholars actually had differences of opinions on whether this is all of us, or whether those are different levels. So what does that actually mean? Do I have nafsan ammara bisu and a nafs al-lawama, and I also have a nafs mutma'inna and a nafs al-mulhama? So do I feel that there is part of my nafs is pushing me and motivating me to do the wrong thing, and part of me is constantly, why did I do this, blaming myself or feeling guilty, and sometimes feeling mutma'inna, content, and feeling stable and feeling that tranquility, and in nafs al-mulhama, in where part of me, I've got a gut feeling that there's something is wrong in this. All right. Now, is this every single person, or is this just are these levels basically from one level to another, in where I would begin with nafs ammara bisu, I would begin with nafs telling me to do the wrong things, and then I would grow in my ability to recognize the wrong things and to start blaming myself when I recognize wronghood. And then once I recognize wronghood, then I put in the effort to change wronghood until I become a level of tranquility and stability, and I'm feeling content. I managed to cross all those challenges and go beyond the challenges, and I became a nafs al-mutma'inna. And the nafs mutma'inna grows in its capacity to the point that it starts seeing beyond the do's and the don'ts, where it starts recognizing that وَمَن يَرْغَبُ عَن مِلَّةِ إِبْرَاهِيمَ إِلَّا مَن سَفِيهَ نَفْسَهُ, that it starts seeing beyond those do's and don'ts, and it starts having that ability to see beyond the let's call it the boundaries, to recognize when something is not right in this. In other words, I don't have a halal haram answer, but I'm feeling that this might be haram. It's in nafs al-mulhama. They started recognizing and going beyond the boundaries. Now, one final point. So should I isolate myself, and is that positive isolation, or what do I do? Well, not all isolation is necessarily positive, and not and always socialization is necessarily positive. It really depends on yourself and your capacity and who and how. So when we're talking about introverts and extroverts, not all people can necessarily relate to people, and not all people were basically leaders by skill or leaders by their own selves. All right. Not everyone is like that. So in general, there are certain responsibilities that you cannot say, I'm an introvert and therefore I can't do this, and therefore just walk away. There are certain responsibilities that you have to engage in, and being patient in dealing with people that might put in hurtful comments or say things that you might dislike is actually part of gaining, let's call it coping skills in dealing with people. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increases our ability to do and work with those coping skills, and says, وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ وَالْعَافِينَ عَلَى النَّاسِ وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ, that the Lord Almighty likes and is content and adores those that would hide and, let's say, contain, let me not use the word hide, but contain their sorrow and their animosity towards others. And they would go into another step. عَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ. They would just forgive the people, and then they would live into even a higher step. Wallahu yuhibbul muhsineen. And the Lord Almighty loves those that give even when others take from them. Those are al-muhsineen. The Prophet ﷺ actually says, من كظم غيظه وهو يقدر على أن ينتصر دعاه الله تبارك وتعالى على رؤوس الخلائق حتى يخيره في حور العين أيتهم. The Prophet ﷺ says, whoever contains their animosity or their hard feelings, and then, even though they're capable of retaliating, the Lord Almighty would actually call them on all, in front of all mankind. And then, this is speaking about a man, of course. So the Lord Almighty will then call him out in front of all mankind and would tell him to choose whatever he wants from al-hur. Well, what will a woman get? Well, if this is what a man gets, don't worry. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will also get you something that will make you content as well. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَئِن صَبَرْتُمْ لَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لِلصَّابِرِينَ. If you contain the feelings, the heart feelings, the sorrow, all the different, let's call it transgression, the patience that you endured, you put in the coping abilities despite all the transgression that people had probably crossed their boundaries with you. Allah Almighty says, it is better for those that want to seek the level of patience. Wait a minute, is even a level of patience even a level? Absolutely, because the more you work on your coping skills, the stronger they become. And the stronger that you become, you will become stronger in your ability to socialize, in your ability to endure pain, in your ability to endure the different challenges, and you become stronger. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاصْبِرْ عَلَى مَا يَقُولُونَ وَهْجُرْهُمْ هَجْرًا جَمِيلًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet ﷺ, and be patient over what they say, and وَهْجُرْهُمْ هَجْرًا جَمِيلًا. And when you isolate yourself from them, when you ostracize yourself from them, do it in a nice way, do it in a beautiful way, do it in a way where you would maintain a relationship, and at the same time, you would not create enemies. This is really important. وَهْجُرْهُمْ هَجْرًا جَمِيلًا. Even if you decide that you want to leave that person because you may not like their manners, because you just dislike their behavior, you dislike their attitude, make sure you don't make them into an enemy. وَهْجُرْهُمْ هَجْرًا جَمِيلًا. Even when you decide to keep distance, do it in a way where you would not find yourself coming across an enemy, but do it in a way where أحيي عدوي مخافة شره كأنما قد حشا قلبي محباتي. Shafi'i said, I would greet my enemy because I would like to keep his evilness away from me, as if my heart contained all the love and all the warm feelings. Why? Because you don't want to bring an enemy. So make sure you live the principle of trying to embrace one another, even when someone hurts you. Now, review of obstacles and pain in life. Pain can be a positive thing. Hardships and obstacles may be the path to success, just like the story of Prophet Yusuf. If Prophet Yusuf was not put in that well, he would have not reached the highest levels in Egypt. He would not have reached the highest levels of all beyond all the people there. And that's the same thing. Hardships and obstacles can actually be the path to success without you realizing. Absolute evil can be a man's behavior, but the Lord Almighty never leaves you in absolute evil. Absolute evil is never attributed to Allah Almighty. And that's why we would say, Al-khayru kulluhu biyadayk. O Lord Almighty, all the good is in your hands. وَالشَّرُّ لَيْسَ إِلَيْكَ. And we would never attribute evil to the Lord Almighty, because the Lord Almighty never creates absolute evil. Allah Almighty will always compensate you when oppression and pain happens. And we mentioned that one before. Don't live your past, but look up ahead. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ما أصاب من مصيبة في الأرض ولا في أنفسكم إلا في كتاب من قبل أن نبرأها إن ذلك على الله يسير لكي لا تأسوا على ما فاتكم ولا تفرحوا بما آتاكم. The Lord Almighty says, every calamity that happens on earth or even in your own selves, depression, sorrow, all the different things that might happen, even on the inside of you, it was decreed in a book before you were even created. That is easy on the Lord Almighty. It's not that he forced such a thing to happen. It is that he knew that such a thing was going to happen. And he let it happen because he created all the different matters in the world. He created the cause and effect. And why? لكي لا تأسوا على ما فاتكم. So that you would not have this deep sorrow over all the different things that have happened earlier. And don't be overjoyful of the things that have come to you. Because at the end, when we speak about overjoyful, that is focusing on the good advantages that you had and actually think that they're actually because of your power, but that they're actually because of an advantage that you deserved. And that's why the Lord Almighty says, Wallahu la yuhibbu kulla mukhtalin fakhur, that the Lord Almighty does not like those that walk in pride. In other words, put a gate of pride and start seeing others as failures, or start seeing others as if they were not as good and deserving the good that you have. But you want to keep in mind that this life is actually a short moment of life. And in the end, that when you live, you've got the present, the past, and the future. Your body right now, you're right there. But you may at many times, without you realizing, focus on the past. But Allah Almighty tells you, you're recognizing this, but بلى من أسلم وجهه لله وهو محسن فله أجره عند ربه ولا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. Many will live the sorrow of the things that happened in the past and will live fear in looking at the future. So the Lord Almighty says, بلى من أسلم وجهه, verily those that would submit their faces. This is a metaphor. This is not literally submitting their faces, but this is actually speaking about your direction of focus. That those that submit their direction of focus to the Lord Almighty, that is, they live to look for the purpose of life. Then those are the people that they will not find sorrow deep in their heart because of the past or fear of something to do in the future. They don't live that fear and sorrow because they know that the capacity that they will be putting in is not really what determines their future. And even the things that happened in the past, the past, if it was a sin that you had committed, the Lord Almighty is most forgiving. And if you had been a victim of some pain, you want to know that the Lord Almighty will compensate you. And now you don't live in the past looking at the pains. And even for the future, you don't live in fear of what might happen, but you put in فَإِذَا عَزَمْتَ فَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ. If you had determined that you wanted to move on, you made the decision, then put in your focus to be on the Lord Almighty, that He is capable of giving you the power to be successful in what you had determined to move forward in. And then you put in your focus on the purpose. فَإِذَا عَزَمْتَ فَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ. And that's why for a believer, they don't feel the fear of future and they don't feel the sorrow over the past, because they recognize the different things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had put within that. What happens to many Muslims? Many avoid the discomfort in avoiding pleasurable things and end up living in dunya. They're afraid, and many times you would say that a sister might actually leave Islam, or a brother or whatever, because they're afraid that, hey, I'm not feeling the fun. It's not fun living in a number of different do's and don'ts, and they end up putting themselves in haram. Going upstairs, running has tingling sensations, but we won't accuse the stairs of being a bad idea. So it's not that halal and haram boundaries are a bad idea. It's not because that they're actually trying to put you within the limits to help you go up the stairs. It's not that the stairs are a bad idea. The stairs are actually there to help you go up the levels, to help you go up your abilities, go up with your coping skills. So just keep that in focus, and keep that as a reminder. Suicide rate within the Muslim community is growing rapidly. In fact, a study that was done by Rania Awad as part of it was actually proving that suicide rate within the Muslim community is actually the highest in all the different groups, even the non-Muslim groups. And there are actually a number of different reasons to it. Muslims leaving Islam is growing, and most of it's really not wanting to leave pleasure and feeling the pressure of needing to do pleasurable things. So most of the times, it's actually not a misconception that we usually think is the reason, but it's actually just wanting to engage in dunya. At the same time, wanting to avoid the feeling of guilt of doing the wrong thing and preferring relativism over Islam is usually what pushes many to say, well, I've tried it and it wasn't for me. It's not an experiment to try. What happens to many Muslims? Many Muslims assume that being Muslim and practicing Islam means you won't have to lead, you won't have challenges in life and pain, which is actually wrong. You will have challenges and pain, even if you practice Sharia with each and every single piece of it. Many Muslims assume that a good and a healthy environment is attainable. And if we did not live in a healthy environment, we were more likely to develop trauma and disorder, and we can only heal through therapy. Both are actually wrong. Even if you practice Islam, you will go through challenges. And even if you live in a healthy environment, you will still have certain challenges also coming in. Islam tells us that healing and therapy are coping skills Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala built within us. Just as our physical body is built with immune system to help us heal from all the different contaminations that surround us, very few people need to be medicated or hospitalized for failed immune system. Well, at the same time, that's the same thing. Yes, some people may need medication to help them cope and cope with the different mental illnesses, but that's only very few people. Many Muslims are now struggling, understanding pain in this life, and have been influenced by unanswered theodicy questions. And they would think, well, why is there pain and all these different things? How do we create an Islamic mindfulness? Borrowing name or practice from different religions leaves you with accepting the definitions that are set for it. Islam tells you that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the light of the heavens and the earth. And therefore, when you look at Islam, you cannot borrow different definitions from here and there and actually apply it on Islam. Islam is a totally different thing. It has its own paradigm. Learn Islam and take the time to do jihad of the nafs and be patient in getting to the fruit of Iman. Jazakumullah khairan, everyone. And sorry for taking long, but I had to finish the slides. Oh, poor thing. They couldn't see the screen. La ilaha illallah. Oh, only one person wasn't able to see the screen. Everyone else was capable of seeing the screen. Uh-oh. So here a sister says, tell me more about specific negative people that you have mentioned that we probably didn't realize that are Actually a whole different lecture. And I guess the worst of those people are really the people that are constantly, I would say, narcissist. That's probably one of the worst things to have in your life, because they start wanting to control you and control everything in your life. And then they would many times abuse religion and use it just to feed some sort of some sort of holy label on themselves, and would make you feel like you have to live your life to feed their master lifestyle and their master position. And that's actually one of the worst things. So just to answer one of those questions, if there's any other question, jazakumullah khairan everyone. And if there's anyone else that would like to comment on anything, I know that I took so long and the number of attendees actually went to half. So if there are any comments or answers, or probably questions, answers even, that I have probably missed, go ahead and unmute yourselves. I'd be happy to listen. I guess no one wants to say anything. All right. So if Sister Homa, if you can send me the link for the recorded lecture, please, that would be extremely nice. And jazakumullah khairan everyone. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.